We got a new look at Zack Cregger's Resident Evil, and I for sure have some thoughts on this one. Now, at first upon hearing Zack was to direct a Resident Evil film, I didn't have much of an opinion at the time because I never watched one of his movies before. I just thought, hey, I heard some good things about this guy, so he might knock it out of the park. Then when it was revealed he'd be doing a new story instead of faithfully adapting the games, I became disappointed. If there is something that upsets me a lot when it comes to these RE adaptations, it was the constant need for writers and directors to simply make fanfiction instead of adapting the already existing stories. It happened for years, decades actually. Now before you say, welcome to Raccoon City did a more faithful adaptation than anything else, that film is not exactly what I would call faithful. Sure, that includes characters from the games and settings that we have already explored, but you see, that's one of the many problems it has. The Spencer Mansion incident did not occur at the same exact time as Raccoon City's downfall. Those events occurred 2 months apart, the Mansion incident in August and the Raccoon City outbreak in September and October. The movie decides to combine both of these events to occur at the same exact time, and this leads the STARS Alpha team to exist around Leon, who they never met until much later in their lives. I'm also sure Chris and Claire did not grow up in the Raccoon City orphanage where apparently Lisa Trevor lives. You know, the tragic character from Remake who lived alone in the Spencer Mansion because it's where her family was tortured and killed through experimentation. Something she endured as well? Yeah, sure. These are just 3 inaccuracies, by the way, of a bunch more. So yeah, just because a film does the bare minimum, which is adapting what it should, because it's a video game adaptation, does not always mean it's going to be faithful. To add more fuel to the fire, let's talk a little bit about the Paul W.S. Anderson films, a series of films that really pissed me off. Now listen, I'm okay with the first one, kind of. Everyone and their mother saw the first movie and thought, yeah, it was kind of good, it was decent. I'm not a big fan of it that much, but that's the most bearable one in the 6-movie lineup. Wait, hold on, he directed 6 of these? What were they smoking? Still, the first one is passable while gifting Capcom the idea to give us the iconic and much cooler laser grid hallway sequence in RE4 OG.
Got it.
In terms of what I hate about these movies, it all stems from the director and writer's wife, Mila Jovovich, who plays the main lead of these films, who is also an original character. Her name is Alice, and she's one of the worst parts about these movies. I really don't like the character since everything revolves around her existence while having the thickest plot armor imaginable. Nothing towards Mila, she seems fine and all, but I'm not a fan of what Alice does throughout the 6 installments, including overshadowing the main cast of the RE games, which is probably the biggest sin that the character could commit or these films commit. You guys love Jill Valentine, right? One of the best RE characters in existence. What if I told you in the second movie, which is an adaptation of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, Alice at every turn steals Jill's spotlight whenever she's going to do something really awesome or meaningful, or both. By the way, this will not be the only time she steals an RE character's spotlight. Just want to throw that out there. Jill Valentine is perfectly casted though. I buy that Sienna Guillory is indeed the character. But what does Paul do here as the writer of Apocalypse? Shoehorns his wife to be the only capable one in the entire film. She literally fistfights Nemesis, who looks pretty good for 2004, I'll give it credit, as Jill along with Carlos sit and watch. Nemesis also cries, becomes a good guy, then he dies like a bitch. Did I mention Nemesis actually has a name and his name is Matt? Like, one of the biggest badasses in the Resident Evil villain lineup, and his name is Matt. Nothing towards Matt's, but like, you get it. It's Nemesis.
What up, Matt? Hey, you kicked my wrench! Jerk face.
Complete big badass tyrant that just runs around giving Jill Valentine and Carlos an extremely hard time in the games is Matt from the first movie. I can't make this up. Okay, I'm gonna halt right there to talk about these adaptations because I value my sanity, and also because the world ends in the next one, and Alice gets more powers, clones, and these things cease to feel like the games at all. Even by a little bit. It's just completely insane nonsense after the second movie, so I'll spare my sanity, like I stated, for right now. Although, I hope you understand how these don't feel faithful when it's best put as, like Marcus said, waifu fanfiction. So, thanks Marcus. Here's a fun fact for you though. Paul casted Mila again in the easily forgotten live-action Monster Hunter movie where her and other expendable military characters get isekai'd into the Monster Hunter universe. I'm not joking, but that's not today's topic. Just a little fun fact, because if I had a nickel for every time Capcom allowed Paul to direct a live-action adaptation for their games where he casted his wife as the main protagonist, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot. But it's sad that it happened twice, right? If I ever casted my wife or significant other in a Resident Evil film or TV series, she's either A, some civilian, B, a zombie, or C, a civilian who becomes a zombie. Nothing more. So, you must be asking, what are you getting at here, Clark, with all of the complaining, all of this bitching and moaning? What does this have to do with Zack's new movie? Well, I'm simply making these points to say, I do not want anyone trying to rewrite the negative criticism to be more positive as they pull a Star Wars prequel revisionist movement just to downplay Zack Cregger's new RE film that has yet to release. I understand criticizing things you do not like about the film, that is completely okay, but we are not going to be so low that we elevate the Anderson films, of all things, to downplay an unreleased film, especially an adaptation that is built around an OC who has everything handed to her and wears, like I stated, the thickest plot armor imaginable. She is just apparently perfect. We are not doing that, okay? So now that's all out of the way, let's finally talk about Zack's upcoming video game adaptation, Resident Evil, set to release in September later this year.
September 28th, daylight. The monsters have overtaken the city. Somehow, I'm still alive.
Honestly, yeah, I was upset with Zack not directly adapting the first game. I wasn't pleased with what I was hearing since everyone else before him did their own thing or took liberties on something easy to adapt. Or both. Like, how hard is it to write and direct the events of the first RE game in the series? A couple of survivors fighting for their life to escape a dangerous mansion full of traps and BOWs, all while solving a mystery. It should be very simple, right? Rewind to a couple months ago on my birthday, I decided to watch Weapons, my first Zack Cregger film, and suddenly I was kind of more open to seeing what Zack's idea of a new story was for Resident Evil. This was before the first trailer, mind you. So, after the first and now secondary trailer, including some interviews, clips and all, how do I feel as a whole on Zack's vision? Well, I'm not over the moon, but I don't feel hate for what I'm seeing on screen either. I'm, in fact, cautiously optimistic. Still, we've been burned way too many times by poor RE adaptations. Burned so much that not all of us are even willing to trust a good director's take on one of the best video game franchises ever made. All because people can't stick to the games. I watched both trailers and there's definitely clear inspiration from the games. Let me make it clear though, just because there are things from the games in your film does not mean it's 100% faithful or even good. As a fan and a viewer, I expect there to be in-universe items in a film that's supposed to be adapting that universe. That's just common sense. Even if it gets the timeline wrong on purpose. More on that later. It's Resident Evil though, so I'm not going to clap and scream like I'm in an MCU showing because I see anything from the source material like the wrong shotgun shells. Zack, buddy, as petty as this is, these are heavy field shotgun shells from RE4, RE5, and RE6. I think you should have used at least the Steelboy brand from the RE Engine titles instead of the action game branded shells. I get it, I love RE4 like you do, I know you love it so much, but come on man, at least be a little bit more consistent. We're in the Arklay Mountains, not Spain, Africa, and or China. That's just a nitpick though, so let's keep moving forward. Let's talk some more about the positives and negatives I have for the film. Firstly, I love the idea to bring back a snow setting for Resident Evil. Big RE7 and Village fan here. I love Village's snowy mountainous Romania setting. I'm just a little bit of a sucker for snow. especially when it's pretty well executed. Although I'm sure there was no snow in RC in September, I'm pretty confident about that. Plus, Zack's fuzzy on when the city was destroyed anyway, so I know what we're getting ourselves into.
It takes place almost in real time, but not really. There's a lot of time jumps, but yeah, it takes place over the course of one evening. I'm sort of existing just adjacent to it because I'm not obsessed with the timeline. For me, it's like this is the first night that the T virus has broken out, and in this movie, it is like started in Raccoon City, and he's got to go straight into the eye of the storm, and so that's the deal. So I believe that, you know, when Leon arrives at the police station, that's still kind of like day zero, right? Where shit's you know, freshly gone wrong. So that's the timeline. Now I know that Raccoon City gets nuked, and I'm a little fuzzy on the timeline of when the nuke drops versus the day Leon, you know, sets foot in the police station. That nuking doesn't happen in this movie, which is why I'm not totally like brushed up on all that stuff. So yeah, this exists in like day one Raccoon City. Shit just went south.
I'm not a huge fan of changing when Raccoon City's downfall occurs. I really wish Zack stuck to the 90s instead because, man, RC in modern day feels kind of bland. Granted, we haven't seen all of it, these are just trailer clips, but you get what I'm saying? It feels like the look and feel of the city in the 90s has been completely discarded, scrapping what makes the city so special. You see, there was this distinct look for RC in the games. You had glowing neon signs, historical buildings, and statues of goddesses and whatnot. You had this clash of the past and the present forming together to make the city have an identity of its own, including weird puzzle situations that were constructed in the city. That's more of gameplay reasons, but it added some charm to it, and rather have it looking like your standard modern day city. Raccoon City in the 90s gave you the sense of a bygone era that's being preserved in the midst of the world becoming more advanced. RC has significance setting aside the outbreak or the fact Umbrella ran the city. To really dive into my point even further about its identity being stripped away, the Batman movies over time had very different takes or ideas of what Gotham looked like. Here's the kicker though. All of them had an interesting vision or version except Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. At least it was unique until The Dark Knight. You see, Nolan's take on Gotham was sort of washed away after Batman Begins. It was just a combination of Chicago and New York City after the first film. I'm sorry, but Gotham should be a very visually unique city. I don't mind some modern changes here and there, I really don't. However, you should give it more of an identity. Matt Reeves' The Batman does this very well. It's more modern while still giving it a specific style. It's dark, grimy, and yet very unique to look at. I don't even think of what city they shot this in, I just think, man, Gotham City looks so rad. Not bland like most of the Nolan trilogy. You get where I'm coming from here? I feel like I'm just looking at some modern city they just picked to shoot in that has no visual sauce. All this is why Raccoon City should be set in the 90s, or at the very least, let it pop despite the modern direction. If you're making a more modern version of the city, then still at least make an attempt to make it look like Raccoon City in its own special way. But hey, we can't change that, and I guess I can go along believing this takes place in an alternate universe because, as far as I believe, it very much does. Now what about the film itself? Is it creepy? Is it scary looking? Is it visually striking? Perhaps is it shot and acted very well? Does it somewhat feel like Resident Evil even by a little bit? So far, in all honesty, in my own opinion, I'd say yeah. I'm not going to pretend it's some extremely poor movie in those categories, because I've seen one of Zack's movies before. I think he can pull this off. I'm not saying he is, because I haven't seen it yet, but I think he could. Plus, I already like the main character already, Brian, played by Austin Abrams, who I know will fit into the Resident Evil universe very easily. When I think about it, I think I'll like this movie as a horror movie with some downsides involving the quality of how they adapt the games into what is a side story. And look, I'm all for side stories in the RE universe, big and or small. I'm a big RE7 and Village defender for crying out loud, as well as I am a big Ethan Winters fan. I've been there day one supporting Ethan. You know, I've always been an Ethan Winters fan. Love the guy, so yeah, I'm probably inclined to love Brian as well. I'm just kind of a sucker for things that feel a little tonally disconnected from the much more larger universe where we see some of the most absurd stuff going down. I just would have liked Zack to have respected the simple elements like setting it in the 90s, because I can actually excuse the snow and pretend it doesn't exist there and be like, well yeah, this took place in Raccoon City. If there's anything I would remove a point for though, automatically, no matter how good or bad it is, it would be if Umbrella is ignored or never mentioned at all. I mean, we are following Brian through the streets of Raccoon City, so I expect there to be mentions of the Umbrella Corporation in the movie. I'm assuming whatever Brian's going through hell for is likely to be virus related. I'll guess he's carrying a vial of the T virus or a cure possibly, which is stored in the medical bag. I have no idea. It's just a theory. I'm curious what everyone thinks though. It makes a ton of sense since he's venturing to and through the home of Umbrella into the now extremely tall Raccoon City General Hospital that's owned and funded by them too. I do have a theory about the hospital, and that's the possibility of the hospital's destruction being partially related to Carlos, who escaped the hospital in the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis that blew up. Most likely not, of course, yet it's just wishful thinking from me. I'm sure Zack never played any of the classics like the original Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, basically making that Carlos theory seem less likely to be true. This still would be a very solid nod to the fact that those characters we love are out there doing their own thing during the outbreak. Like I said earlier, I expect to see RE things in the film, like this body here being dragged away from Brian, who was reaching for a key item. We've all been there. And I really do like this clip here.
Into a Resident Evil game, I'm terrible at guns. I wouldn't know how any of them work. I would miss 99% of all of my shots.
God damn it.
I mean, if Brian is smart, he'd pull out his melee weapon to break the lock on the door. Just saying. Rookie mistake. Hey, it happens to all of us. As for the BOW side of things, I'll disagree on people stating the multi-body creature here does not feel like Resident Evil. Maybe it does scream something from the side of N. Night and their beloved The Force series, but we've fought crazier, more outlandish creatures in the franchise, so I think whatever the creature is here is very fitting for Resident Evil. And is there not a creature that looks sort of like this in Resident Evil Outbreak? Or am I misremembering? No? Anyone? I will say, I am not ready for the hospital nursery scene. That right there looks like it might be nightmare fuel. Brian, I hate to break it to you, buddy. You gotta kill that baby. I don't want to hear that it's just a baby when in fact it has Freddy Krueger arms. You gotta kill it. You gotta run away from it. You gotta do something, man. I am so serious when I say there are some creepy ass things in the movie that I do like for it being a horror movie from the trailer at least. Such as the creepy ass zombie lady in the road who is seen running towards Brian in the farmhouse later, which is some very unsettling imagery. Personally speaking, that's really creepy from someone who likes the countryside. And quick theory here, the farmhouse that Brian is in could be Chief Iron's farmhouse. I'm just throwing that out there. Additionally, I do like Zack isn't doing just zombies either. He's not tackling only or primarily zombies. He's also tackling the horrors of BOWs in the RE universe, which is actually pretty cool. Better than the movie acting strictly as a zombie fest, because we've seen that so many times, and also, most importantly, Resident Evil is not just a zombie series. It talks about bioweapons and bioterrorism, so this is very fitting for this franchise. Ultimately, I'm still cautiously optimistic for Zack Cregger's Resident Evil. I'm a little bit excited for it because I do love horror, which is what it looks to execute pretty well just from the trailers. Besides, the bar is severely low since the last few adaptations were hot garbage. As a fan, I would actually appreciate it if at the very least it can be a good movie. Especially since I, as a huge fan of this series, already accept that this movie is not going to be 100% faithful whatsoever. On the other hand, I'm not going to completely hold my breath or get my hopes up at all. We have to wait and see. So go ahead and let me know in the comments below. And thank you everyone so much for the support on the last video as well. I love reading everyone's stories and sharing how they felt, or even asking any questions or recommendations, which I will hope to put up that video soon about the recommendations for the Resident Evil series on how you could begin your adventure. That'd be very awesome to help people out with. Anyways, I'll wrap up the video here. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and as always, I hope each and every one of you have a great and safe day. Thank you.